when people hear that I worked on Guitar Hero and Rock Band, they get confused because they're like, weren't they competitors? Like, yeah, they were eventually, but we actually made Guitar Hero and then we made Rock Band. Like, it doesn't take much time, 10, 20 milliseconds, like, off before things feel funny for the player. Like, I thought I did this, but it says I was late, but I swear I was on time. The game is basically deterministic, except for things like the player input and random numbers, and sometimes things like the amount of time that a frame took, because we use that to feed into the physics engine. And we could just replay it. We could just say, okay, thank you for making your automatic log file of everything you did. We'll have it up in the debugger and we'll see exactly like what variable was uninitialized or whatever.
So I am super interested to kick off this interview with like, how did it started for you? The programming and just game development journey, but probably we should also like paint a picture. How did programming even look like for the kids at home to understand what is going on?
So programming for me started with, let's see, I was a kid in the 70s and my mom was teaching computer science, was teaching programming at Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. And so she had like access to like computer stuff. I remember once she brought home a teletype that we connected via the phone, through some modem to Brandeis University. And, I think I typed in like a basic program to like guess the number, 50, oh, it's higher or lower, it's higher, try 75, like something like that. And it went zzz, 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 it was typing out as things went. So that was how low the tech was. So I would read a little bit about computers. My parents had used computers back in the 60s. And I remember one of my first memories is reading a book about computers that they had and asking them, oh, can we get a computer? And like they laughed. They said, oh, that's so cute. Maybe we can get you a calculator. Like, that's enough for you. And so the first time I really did any real programming, my mother somehow had at work like a TRS-80, and was able to like borrow that for like a weekend, and I like learned some basic and like programmed on that. And then for real, we got an Apple II Plus. This is probably 1980, 81, something like that. And that's when I like really started like experimenting with stuff. Like it was in the basement. I got to like play around with it, do all sorts of experiments.
What did you use for the programming for Apple II?
It was just basic, and there was no editor. You just like typed in, like with basic, there were line numbers, 100, print this thing, 110, like, set X to 0. And if you wanted to add a new line to your program, you just typed it in, and, I need to put in a line in between 100 and 110. Okay, 105, you just type it in, and like, there it is. And then you can list the program. I remember later on, I got a Pascal for the Apple. And in order to run Pascal, first of all, you needed a memory card that would expand the Apple II's memory from 48K to 64K. So you brought this memory card. I think it cost like $100. It was like this big. I put it in the big slot in the back, and now you had 64K. There was an actual editor for the Pascal program, and because Pascal was like the lines were, you wanted to go longer, you had to indent and stuff, you could actually access 80 columns, but the editor let you view the left half or the right half. Like that was it. So that was, but like that was just for playing around really. Like all of the stuff that I really programmed like back in high school was in BASIC, and it was nothing really that exciting. Just like playing around with little programs, maybe typing things in from a magazine, or playing with, I used to, I don't even know if I knew much about the theory behind it, but I used to play with cellular automata a lot, like having like there was a low res a graphics format where it was like 40 by 40 or something, extremely low res, just like these big blocks, but you had lots of colors, unlike the 6 or so colors that you had in the high res resolution. And I would just write programs to just like do row by row, each brick like depends on stuff above it as you fill things in and see what kind of patterns would happen. I remember spending hours just like playing around with that.
Yeah, okay, nice. This was in high school. Do you have like classes, like lessons regarding that?
There was no, I don't remember whether there were programming classes in high school. I didn't take any. I would read stuff that like my mother would bring home from college. So I like knew more stuff about programming. But yeah, I don't think there were even classes to take, or maybe there was some introductory class. I was like, oh, I know all that already, would be a waste.
Okay. So somewhere along the line, you got into MIT after high school. And I'm assuming this is where like serious programming started.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so I was really interested in like learning programming for real. Oh, I guess I had learned, I'd learned Pascal and C. I did some C stuff like at a summer job. I did know like that wasn't that was at also at Brandeis. I'd gotten that summer job, and so that was on like a mainframe or something with like a real editor. I may even have used Emacs or something, like writing stuff in C. So I had done some stuff like for semi-real before college. But then, first class at MIT, freshman year, the famous 6001 Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, which is in Scheme. And it was very...
This is the same for Berkeley, no? Like... Everybody starts with Scheme in US in like colleges.
Not anymore. Now they do. Now I think it's Python, which is probably like better in some ways. But I really, I feel that they miss something not having like this very like bare bone. I mean, it really is the fundamentals of computation. And yeah, that was really a whole different way of doing things than I was used to. I remember my very first assignment going into the computer lab and like writing my program and thinking, oh, I'm going to make things a little more neat and to like understand it better. So I'm going to like put some extra parentheses around some things to like group it nicely. And of course, in Scheme and Lisp, like parentheses actually mean something. They're not just for like doing your order of operations right. And so everything broke. I had no idea why. It took me like an hour to figure out why. That was my introduction to Scheme. But by the end of that, you were writing like a Scheme interpreter in Scheme, by the end of our first semester. You learned all sorts of topics. So it was a great introduction to computer science, at least. I don't know, programming, maybe not as much, but, still stuff that I learned then, like, were really good fundamentals for everything in the future.
What do you think of MIT when you look back in terms of, like, preparing you for, like, doing the computer science course? Because people have, like, various opinions about, like, colleges and how good they teach computer science.
Right. Well, this was in the late 80s, so my experience is a little out of date, but I think it actually prepared me and my peers astonishingly well for actual programming, actual software engineering. Like some of there were classes on theoretical things, but they were also classes on like software engineering. Like they took that very seriously. And I like didn't realize until later when I was working with other people with other backgrounds, how much I kind of took for granted what I learned about software engineering and how to put a program together from my classes there. You know, like a lot of what we did were like these were pretty decently sized projects where you had to put together like a program that was, you know, thousands and thousands of lines of code, and you had to actually architect it. You know, I took a compiler class where we wrote a compiler, and it was not just theoretical stuff.
Okay. When you say software engineering, you mean like how do you structure the code? How do you architect it on the software side? Less so like how this will work underneath. Like software engineering, you mean structuring of the code,
like,
architecture.
Yes, structuring and, you know, writing clean code and how do you break things down and test things and not just write some gigantic, you know, spaghetti code. Like we were, you know, I don't know how much of it was just my natural skill and talent and how much of it was I learned there. But, you know, I really felt like the stuff that I wrote coming out of there was already, you know, clean, well-structured, well-engineered code, even like right out of school. And I think a lot of people don't really pick that up until they actually have a job.
Yeah. You need to get like some experience with architecturing big programs, right? To get it done. Like, and then okay. So at some point, you're joining Looking Glass. Do you finish MIT?
Yes, I got a music degree. That's another story. I was majoring in computer science and music. Well, I was majoring in computer science, taking lots of music classes on the side, because I've been playing music since I was like 4. And at some point I realized if I just take like 2 more music classes than I was going to anyway, I could also get a music degree. So I also got a music composition degree from MIT.
So while you were at MIT at computer science, you were also taking classes like music, and this was also at MIT. And then you realized that you can actually get a couple of more classes to get both degrees.
Yes.
This was a lot of work, a lot of time also.
It was a busy time, but you know, you're at college and I just like love like learning things and doing things, and it was just like all there in front of me, and so I just like I took it all in. You know, I kind of wish I could have stayed for like a couple more years and just taken like more classes and learned a lot more things. So I could like tell the story of like my Looking Glass like connection in the first place, or if there's anything else.
No, we should a little bit explore the music part, because you said that you were playing you were doing music stuff from 4 years old, which means like what kind of instruments and how did you like play? Because both computer science and music quite distant. How did you?
Yeah. I was just always, I loved music. I grew up in a house where music was being played and like, you know, it was on the stereo. My grandfather was a composer, actually. And when I remember when I was like 4 or something, I made my mother show me how pianos worked, like, you know, what the keys do, and, you know, how you play melodies and everything. I was just fascinated by it, and I would just fool around on the piano, like, you know, all the time, all day. And I took piano lessons, and, you know, I had a lot of talent, I think, but I didn't have a lot of motivation to really practice a lot. You know, if you're going to be a good piano player, any instrument, you have to spend a lot of time doing boring stuff, just like getting better and better and practicing. It's just like how it is. And I did not really have the patience for that. So I was, a very good hack pianist. Like my musicianship was always very good. I understood a lot about how music works and the theory, and I had a good ear. But as far as performance went, I never became like a virtuoso or something like that.
Was then computer science had like a majority? How did you structure? Like, did you ever consider music your career, or was it like something in the background that you do?
No, it was always something in the background. I mean, computer programming is a lot easier to use as a career than music.
Oh yeah.
So I don't think I ever really seriously considered trying to doing something like professional with it. Maybe like on the side, would be nice if like I could get something out of that. But it was always like being a very enthusiastic amateur.
Okay. So at some point you're finishing both degrees and yeah, tell me the story about you joining Looking Glass.
Okay, so MIT back then, people didn't have like personal computers in their room. There were these big computer clusters all over campus that might have anywhere from 8 to like over 100 computers. That I should remember like what kind they were, but they were like real computers as of 1988 or whatever, all networked and everything, running Unix. And that's what we did all our assignments on, all our computer science assignments. Also, you had school email, you could connect to Usenet, like all of this stuff. And I would, do my computer work there. And when I wasn't in my copious spare time, when I wasn't doing my computer science homework and my music homework and all of that stuff, I would hang out at the computer cluster and play games. So the big one that I was addicted to was Moria. It was like a sort of rogue kind of game where, you could spend like weeks and weeks like building your character up to level, 40 or whatever, and then it would suddenly die and you'd have to start all over. So I'd spend hours and hours there. And there were other people who would spend lots of times in the computer clusters playing games, and you'd walk around, you could see other people were playing games. So it kind of became like a social thing. And so I made friends among the people who were playing games there. And one of them was Doug Church, who ended up being, like employee number 3 or something at Looking Glass, and that name. And another one was, his name was Terry Donahue, and he was like a better programmer than either of us. He was writing this program basically all by himself called X-Tank. It was for the X Window system. All these programs were X whatever. And it was a top-down 2D game where you like drove a tank around in a maze and shot other tanks. And you could play multiplayer. It was networked. And he added in like an AI system for it. So like there were hooks so that you could write a program to be an AI, link in a program to act like a human would act, get the same kind of inputs and drive enemy tanks around. And he encouraged his friends, including me and Doug, to help out with the program. So we did various things. And I was taking an AI class at the time. And so I was writing an AI program for one of the modes of this tank game, which actually this mode wasn't about shooting things at all. It was kind of an ultimate frisbee simulation. Kind of. You had your tank driving around, and as you drove around, this little disc would circle you, and at any time you could press a button to release it. It would fly off tangent to its current velocity, and you could catch it. If it went at you, you could catch it and then be circling you, or you could throw it at a goal and you could intercept stuff. It was actually more fun to play than the tank game. So I wrote an ultimate Frisbee AI for X-Tank that was like superhuman. It was, I figured out all these great techniques to just like aim things perfectly. And then when Doug, who was a year ahead of me, and he had left MIT to, I think he had some other job in between, but he was working at Blue Sky Productions, which later was retitled Looking Glass. And they were making this Underworld game. And he said to me, we need an AI programmer. And you're an AI programmer, obviously, since you wrote this like AI ultimate disc simulator. So like, why not come to Blue Sky and write the AI for Underworld? I said, that sounds perfect. So that's what I did. So that was how I got my start there.
Was it because like when I'm researching Looking Glass origins, I always see the information that a lot of people were dropping out of MIT to join there. Was this true?
Well, Doug did. I actually came to MIT before I finished my computer science studies. I did everything but the thesis, and I got my music degree, but I never got around at that point to doing the computer science thesis. But I was like, I have a degree anyway, so that's not dropping out. I have my diploma, although it's in music. I'm not sure how many people actually like dropped out of MIT to work there. I think most people we did get a lot of people from MIT because it was largely our friends, but most of them finished up first.
Okay. So you don't have degree. You didn't get around to finish write the thesis, and you don't have the degree.
That comes late. I actually did do I took some time later to finish the thesis. I felt bad about having done like 90% of the work and not 100.
So you joined to work on Underworld, which was games before Ultima Underworld.
At that point, I think it was Ultima. I think they had already talked to Origin and gotten the go-ahead to make it Ultima.
Okay.
But when it was started, it was not an Ultima yet. It was a generic thing.
Okay. Which was a top-down game, like an RPG.
No, Underworld was always this first-person 3D thing. So Ultima was the series of games that had started back in the 80s, I guess, so at that point, Ultima 6 maybe was about to come out or had come out. So Origin, the publisher, had done a bunch of these Ultima games, starting from like Ultima 1 was like a one-man operation, and then they had gotten stuff built up. But they had done around 6 Ultima games at that point, which were basically top-down, some kind of fake 3D, like wireframe, like move one square at a time kind of stuff, but not real 3D. And they were working on Ultima 7, I guess. And not me, but Paul Naref, who ran Blue Sky, and who knew some people at Origin, he had done a game for them before, convinced them to put the Ultima brand on our game Underworld, which was this first-person 3D game.
Okay, and sort of these two tracks merged this way into Ultima Underworld.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So it was in their universe, but it was very different tech and a very different kind of game. I'm actually kind of surprised that they went for it. Because it didn't really fit with the Ultima brand in a bunch of ways, I think. But worked out fine.
So this was Ultima Underworld 1.
Yes.
Okay. And you joined to do AI, but I guess in this type of like situation, you're kind of doing more stuff than just a single thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, lots of us, all the programmers were really doing everything.
Yeah.
The company was like Paul Nurath, who ran it. We had three or four programmers when I started, including me, and maybe 2 artists, and that was it. That was the entire company, which meant there was no like designer, and in those days, like game designer was not really a job yet. Like games were, like the games that I played on my Apple, like in high school, were basically designed by the person who programmed them. It was a very, like, I think it was hard to design games without being a programmer, because like what you could do was limited by the capabilities that the machine had. Just like things didn't split up into these specialties like so much yet. So I ended up becoming basically like lead designer, like as it is known today, in terms of like writing and stuff like that. As far as like the design of the game itself, how it played, that was a total, like everybody just pitched in stuff all over the place. And Doug was probably the one who the most sort of had it all in his head and, would, if not veto or insist on things, like very strongly argue for them to the point where we were like, yeah, okay, fine. That's how it goes. But he probably had the most vision of like what the game was. But a lot of it was just, we would code in some things like, oh, it'd be cool if this thing worked, because we're basically writing a dungeon simulator, and we would like put in this physical thing or this AI thing or whatever. And I'm like, oh, now that that's in, what can we do with it? Oh, here are some ideas. Oh, sure, let's throw that in as part of the plot. And so the game design of like the systems and everything was like done by everyone. Because we didn't have anyone whose job it was to do all the writing, really, all of the level design and writing was done by the programmers and artists. Each person basically got one level to design, including the conversations. And I was kind of the person responsible for like managing all of that and making sure that, everything made sense. Like, oh, for this puzzle, we need someone to find, this item. Okay, John, you go put that on level 6, and make sure that someone and then, Doug, on level 3, make sure that someone gives a clue to how to find it. And then I would go and like make sure everything actually fit together.
That sounds like an ungrateful job to do, like all this tying loose ends. Everybody's doing their own thing, and you're there to like make it happen.
Yeah, I don't know. It was kind of fun. But yeah, it was a weird way to put something together. It was very distributed. And, I don't know when playing the game, like how easy it is to realize that like it was kind of a mishmash of all sorts of people doing all sorts of different things, and me frantically tying it all together. But those games back in those days were all kind of a little random anyway. Things are much more tightly plotted and designed these days. We had all grown up playing other like Ultima type games, like in the 80s, other games from that time that were just very woolly and very ragged, and you can, kind of see all the loose ends, and that was kind of the charm of it.
How did it look like technology-wise in terms of like what did you like? I'm assuming this was C programming language wise.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the computers you used, like, do you remember like specs or something to like give the?
I was the first person to get a 386 computer when I joined. They were all using 286s. This would be in like spring 1991. And the 386 had a floating point chip. That was the really exciting thing about it. Everyone was very envious. So people on the team had 286s. They probably upgraded later. And we were targeting 286s. So this meant no floating point operations. So everything we did, including, all of the physics and stuff like bouncing around, that was all in fixed point. Everything was, spec'd out to the bit. We had, you had 640K of memory that you could address easily, and up to a meg using like expanded memory or extended memory or whatever. I still can't remember how that all worked. But the memory was super tight. Everything was packed down into bit fields. I remember, heading, facing was 3 bits. That's all we could afford. It wasn't like, oh, here's, a floating point for the number of radians or anything. It was just 3 bits. Is it facing north or northwest or west or whatever? That's all we had room for.
Wow. Okay.
I remember doing the pathfinding for monsters, which was a pretty expensive thing to do, not just in time, but also in memory. And we didn't have room to store paths for, an arbitrary number of monsters to be following as they tried to find you. So there was some fixed number of paths that I don't remember how many it was, but it was pretty small, that were available. And if a monster wanted to get to you and there wasn't a path available, would have to wait until one freed up because some other monster died or lost interest or something like that. So yeah, everything was both in time and space very we managed it down to the last detail. Space, not just in memory, but in display as well. It wasn't a very big screen, 320 by 200, 240. And so deciding exactly what was going to go into every pixel was, a big deal. It was very different from once 3D cards came around.
And then you had there was a layout that was here you get the inventory, here you have the controls so that whether you're facing north or something, and here you have the image what you actually see,
which was only that big because that's how much we could afford to render.
Yeah, but also
it's not we would have made it full screen. That's how many pixels we could actually put out a frame.
Yeah. How did it work? I can't imagine now working in a group and then deciding how much screen real estate you have for your features, and also thinking about the memory, meaning you have so little to work with. You need to share it with across the team. So you're hey, here you have this much kilobytes, you have this much kilobytes. Well, how does it work?
I think I don't remember having to make actually really difficult decisions about things. I think we were all just very aware that things had to be as small and as fast as they could be. And so we just were all doing that as much as we could. I don't remember there being some feature that someone tried to put in and then we were no, sorry, it's too big. We just knew what we had to work with.
So, for example,
I'm probably forgetting some big fight or something. But
so, for example, you're working on pathfinding and you realize that there's no way you can do your thing from end to end and fit in. So you at some point end up picking let's say a fixed number, let's say 4 paths for monsters, and then you kind of hope that this will be enough, and then you go about your day.
Yep. And it was. Yeah, I don't know. We did not really realize that what we were doing was so hard. Like, obviously we knew it was hard, but we didn't know it was impossible. Like, we're like, okay, we're smart, we'll figure this out. Like, let's try. So any roadblock that we came up against, I think our natural inclination was like, okay, well, how can we get past it, rather than like, oh, I guess we can't do that.
Okay. And how did then the development go? I think it was developed in like, I don't remember the name exact. Now I know that Ultima Underworld was like 8 months or 9 months was supposed to be developed. What about the first one?
The first one, I came in the spring of 91, and we got the whole thing. It was released at the beginning of 92. Wow, I'm surprised. It felt like longer than that.
Wow.
But they'd been working on it for a while before I showed up. They had, all of the 3D stuff and the editor and a lot of the physics and stuff like that was done before I showed up. So it was probably maybe 2 years.
When you say,
I worked on it for the second year.
The editor, how did the editor look like?
There was... we must have had like an actual 2D view. Basically, the editor was the same program as the game. Like, the game was basically the editor with things like if def out.
Yeah.
So you could always, when we were running the game, we always had the editor around, and we could like drop out into the editor and like look at things. And so now I'm trying to even remember. I wonder if there are like screenshots of it somewhere. There probably are. But like, we had a map, and you could like look at the properties of things and see how things were connected to things. This was how people actually made the levels.
Okay.
Yeah, so that functionality was already there, like when I showed up in beginning of 91.
Okay. So, do you want to highlight some of the things that you worked on besides the one that you've already did?
In Underworld 1, the AI was really the big thing. Yeah, and then doing all the like the design, the plot design stuff, or like managing it, because everybody like did all of it. There were only a few of us programming it, and you kind of had to know everything to get anything done anyway. So like, I did stuff in the like physics and as well, and things with just sort of what we called the object system, like just keeping track of where everything was, and just like the general like database of objects and stuff like that. But the AI was definitely like the main thing. That was my baby. Okay.
And AI was the monster behavior, the pathfinding, other subsystems.
And because we were trying to have we were silly, and we were trying to simulate everything. Like, this was our dream. Like, it was basically a dungeon simulator. So, the monsters had also, they didn't just like sit around in a room and like wait for you to come up and attack them. They had like motivations and like goals,
really?
And they might have various attitudes towards you. And like, I remember like writing a system where, like, say there was like a goblin, and like maybe the goblins like weren't too fond of you, but like they weren't like your enemies or anything, but then you went up to one and attacked it, and it got really mad. So while you were sleeping, it would, like, all the goblins would talk to each other and like average out like their feelings about you. So if like one of them was really mad, the other ones, if you then encountered some other goblin the next day, maybe it would attack you because it had learned, that you were an enemy. But of course, if you had killed the first goblin and no one saw it, then, it never told anyone. And so like the other ones didn't care. There were all these systems like running in the background that probably no one noticed, and probably actually made the game like harder to play than otherwise, but like we wanted it to be like realistic, so we did all these things.
Okay, nice. And this was Ultima Underworld 1. Do you remember the release, how it looked like? when you're launching the game?
I remember seeing it in a store and just thinking like it was fake. Like I wanted to warn people in the store away from buying it. Like other people, real game designers, real game publishers make real games. This is just something that like my friends and I hacked together. Like you don't want to pay $40 for it. What are you thinking? No, it was amazing to see this thing like out in the real world, like on shelves. Yeah, that was
Nice.
a very proud moment.
And Looking Glass, was it already Looking Glass then, or Blue Sky Productions?
I don't remember when it exactly changed to Looking Glass Technologies, and then later it changed again to Looking Glass Studios, but I forget the timing.
Okay, but this was sort of like not. It was not common to have game studios in Boston area, MIT area, right? Like this was like a lone game studio when everybody else was on the other coast. If I get this right.
Yeah, what happened was that Paul, who started it, lived in New Hampshire, I think. Like we actually, or maybe northern Massachusetts. We actually started in New Hampshire, or just short of the border between Massachusetts and New Hampshire, which is to the north. And then as we kept on hiring more people from Boston and MIT, we convinced Paul to move the company south to like just outside Boston. But yeah, there was not much of a game development scene in Boston at the time.
Because I was leading to, in my mind, if you had a launch, there was no internet back then. So you kind of see the game, or was
there was an internet.
Okay.
And we had a demo. I'm trying to remember how this was distributed. We had a demo. And I don't know if the demo was distributed on like bulletin boards or whatever, but there was a demo. You could just play the first level. And I remember reading people talking about the demo on Usenet. Okay. And being blown away by it. And that's like when we knew like, okay, people actually like are going to like this for real. So there was, I think, the main kind of way we got feedback about like what people liked and didn't was through Usenet probably. Okay. Then like a computer gaming magazine like might come out a couple months later with some like reviewers' formal opinions about it.
Okay. Because I was imagining your release day and like launch day, and then like you have no idea how to know anything. Yeah. And then like, oh, and by the way, there's no other game studios around because everybody's on the other coast. So like we're kind of like releasing it and then we see it in the store.
Yeah, you kind of launch it and just like,
where is it?
Okay, have fun. And like, we'll find out in a few weeks, like what people actually thought.
Okay.
Yes.
But you had some feedback on Usenet already. So you kind of knew what's going on. Okay. Nice. And then, what I learned that Ultima Underworld 1 was very popular, but it also like there were other PC the consoles releases, so it wasn't like huge thing. Or was the release like blowing people away from the first day?
I don't really know. I never really knew like just how well it was selling. I knew like the reactions that it got like from like people on Usenet. I knew like, it got good reviews in like gaming magazines and such. But it was, I never really knew much about like the business side of things. So as far as, I don't remember it ever being like a big, question of like whether there was going to be a second. I think that like it was pretty clear that Origin would be happy to do a sequel. I think one thing was that people didn't really know what to make of it because it was a first-person, real-time 3D game when these things like didn't really exist or were just starting to exist. Like Wolfenstein like came out like right around the same time. And I remember there being a really like tough discussion on how they were going to advertise it. You didn't make like a YouTube trailer. So they had, ads in computer gaming world or whatever. And the ads, I remember some of these ads, you can probably still see them where it's like they show like 3 or 4 different screenshots in a row of like the same scene from like very slightly different angles just to like prove that it was smooth 3D and not like, switch 90 degrees at a time. Like that was the only way we thought we could get this across.
Yeah. I remember.
And
I remember now that I learned that this was advertised as continuous movement 3D technology, so that people understand it's not like you have a shot and then you have a shot. It's like continuous.
Right. Because there was like 3D going back to the mid 80s of like, say a wireframe, like Hall of Cubes or whatever. And now you're facing east and now you're facing south. And we had to convince people that this was actually something different.
Nice. So
we would show it to people and like bring up the opening screen and it looked nice. It was texture mapped. This was kind of new. And like you're in this dungeon area and there's a door and there are some walls and they're angled and people be like, oh, cool. And then we'd like move, like rotate like 2 degrees and people go,
yeah.
Like they thought, this was some static view and like you were going to then like move forward 10 feet and see the next static view and just like we're not prepared for the fact that this was something you could smoothly navigate through.
Nice. Who worked on the rendering and texture mapping?
So the texture mapper, which was kind of the kernel of the whole thing, like that's what the existence of that made Paul think, oh, we could do like a dungeon game like that. That was made by a programmer named Chris Green, who worked for someone named Ned Lerner, who was a compatriot of Paul's. And then Chris Green later worked at Valve doing tech stuff there. I'm not sure what he's up to now, if anything. But I guess, so it was his texture mapper. I don't know if we bought it or were given it or whatever. But it was amazing that it worked at all, right, on a 286 doing real-time texture mapping. It was, if you've looked at it, it was, it had issues in terms of, fidelity. Things were just like super warped all over the place. We thought at the time that this was just due to, approximations that had to be made in order to get the thing to run at all, doing like, linear approximations when you really should be doing quadratic ones or whatever. It turned out later, I think, that there were actual bugs in it that it could have been better. And I think maybe in Underworld 2 it did get better. But because we knew that it couldn't be perfect, we kind of overlooked all issues in it as thinking that they were just like had to be there. Anyway, he like sort of handed us the texture mapper, and then Doug was really the main rendering guy. So working with that, he did all of the low level and mid level and mostly high level stuff with the rendering. So that was his big thing.
Okay. So then we close the Ultima Underworld 1, and Origin is very happy and wants to do Ultima Underworld 2, and he wants to do in 9 months to hit Christmas, which is like... So I saw, that you had mentioned that before, and
I was like, yeah, 9 months. I don't know. We like Guitar Hero, which we'll get to later. That we did that in 9 months too. So to me, like doing a game in under a year doesn't seem crazy. And Ultima Underworld 2 was a sequel. Like the tech did not change much. There were some new things added on top, like we put in ice, I remember. But like I didn't really work on Underworld 2 except for the music. But I don't think there was really like an AI programmer on it. So maybe like now someone's going to be very offended that I'm ignoring all of the amazing AI stuff they did in Underworld 2. But it was largely, having to do lots of design, actual real, lots of level design, lots of conversations, and stuff like that. And so that we finally hired real designers to do that. Like that was their job. But on the tech side, I think it was basically the same engine. I think it was probably, I would guess the Underworld 1 engine was like 90% of the way there.
Okay. And you worked on music for Ultima Underworld 2, like full time?
No. Well, full time for 1 week. Okay. So, what happened was the music for Underworld 1 was done or managed by a guy whose his handle was the Fat Man. The Fat Man did like music like for Origin, like all sorts of like top end games around that time. Like you went to the Fat Man to like have him like compose your music, and I think he farmed some of it out, but like whatever, the music was fine. And then we were doing Underworld 2, and I don't know if he was going to like charge too much or he was busy or whatever, but it was like going to be like, it wasn't so easy to get him to do the music for Underworld 2. And I said, hey, I have a music degree in composition, and my coworker, Seamus here is a jazz pianist. Like, why don't the two of us just like write the music in a week? So, and we got the go ahead. So this is, by the way, Seamus Blackley, who then later led Flight Unlimited from Looking Glass, then went and was like the co-creator of the Xbox. So like that was like his start at Looking Glass. So the two of us like hung out in Seamus's apartment for a week with a MIDI editor and wrote the music, which was fun.
And you've done it in a week for the entire thing?
Yeah, because how much music was there? I don't know. The music back then, there wasn't that much of it. It was all just kind of repeated a bunch. There was probably, I don't know, less than 20 minutes of music like in the whole thing. And it was MIDI being played on a sound card. So there was, you had maybe 4 voices or so, 4 to 6, I don't know, like, different instruments that could play at the same time. So it's not like you can make some big orchestral score anyway. You're like, oh, okay, I'll put in a bass and a violin and a clarinet. And like, you're running close to the limit already. So just in terms of like number of notes to write, it wasn't a huge amount, and I can kind of churn it out when I have to.
Did you enjoy it? Do you enjoy it more than programming?
I enjoy music and programming very much in different ways, sort of complementary ways.
Okay. Was it a nice thing to step away from technical side for a week, but also then to come back to this like world of technicality?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, no, I find that they're very complementary that way. And like you don't really, sometimes you have to debug music. Sometimes you can, like, I have to figure out how to put something in this measure isn't working right. I have to get from this point to this point, and none of these pitches are working, and maybe I just to back up and rewrite things. So you do have to debug music a little, but it's not like programming where like, you find out like a day before you have to ship that there's like a seg fault that no one knows how to find. It's a different kind of frustration.
Okay. It did happen in Ultima Underworld 2, the seg fault before the release.
Oh, we were getting bugs up until the end, and it was a tough game to debug, and I learned things about debugging that I was able to apply later. Maybe we'll get into. Because, like, for example, I was talking about these crazy AI systems that I was writing, and, they were kind of opaque, and we kind of assumed stuff was working, but, like, we didn't have, like, unit tests or anything. Things didn't work. If a tester reported that things seemed to crash when they did something, we're just like, oh, okay, I guess I'll try doing that too and see if I can get it to crash. That was not very efficient. The renderer would occasionally hang or crash, and we figured out pretty late in the process that the way to ensure that there were no bugs in the renderer was to just teleport to a random place in the dungeon, take a picture, teleport to another random place in the dungeon, take a picture, and just like do that every second. And if you can do that for, overnight and it never crashed, then like probably the renderer is good. But what would happen is when we started doing this, every morning we would come in the next day and the renderer had crashed, and we knew exactly what it was what it was trying to render. So we're like, okay, now we can debug that. And by we, I mean Doug, because he was the renderer guy. And so then he would figure out what happened in that exact scenario that was causing something, some uninitialized variable, some overflow, I don't know. Okay, so now we think we fixed it. Now run it again the next night. We probably spent like 2 weeks doing that.
Nice. I can't imagine this constrained environment, and then working. Everything is pretty much hand rolled from scratch, and you need to get very deep into understanding every little thing to understand what is happening.
There were only a couple things that weren't done by us. There was the sound system, like the low-level sound system was done by another guy named John Miles, who sold like the Miles sound system, which then later became part of Rad Game Tools. And we got like a sound effect library from Origin that Origin like used for their own stuff for like doing sound effects. Sound effects weren't digitized. It wasn't samples. It was like some weird manipulation of like sound card stuff that like I just played with until I got sound effects that worked well. But everything else I think was like, was us. We had the code. It wasn't using external libraries.
Nice. So Ultima Underworld 2 releases then, and what happens next?
So I was already working on Terra Nova by the time Ultima Underworld 2 came out. So that had started, I think, in 92 or so. So the Ultima Underworld 2 team mostly rolled onto System Shock. And so System Shock and Terra Nova were the two kind of projects going on. At some point, Flight Unlimited started up, so we might have had all three of those going at once. I think the order they came out in was like System Shock and then Flight Unlimited and then finally Terra Nova.
It sounds to me like, we've done the Ultima Underworld with like 3 programmers, so now if we have like 5 programmers, we're enough to like start 3 projects at the same time. Like, let's go.
We expanded a lot. We had more than 5 programmers. We probably had 5 programmers per project.
Oh, okay.
Underworld 2, that team was pretty light, I think. I wasn't involved as much. But like I said, I think it was largely like design stuff and art. Yeah, so things were expanding. We made by the time we finished Underworld, we had more people. It was mostly like friends of me and Doug from MIT who would like come on and do testing or write some code for us but things were expanding. We probably had at least, when I think I was like the 7th person or so at Blue Sky, and by the time we were making System Shock and Terra Nova at the same time, it was probably at least like 30.
Okay.
Like we had an actual office manager. It was like, yeah, it was sort of a real company. What happened was we had been working on, the office was up in New Hampshire. And so Doug and I would like go up there every day and like, work like as late as we could really until our car ride, who's also someone who lived in Boston, like was ready to go, and we go back home. And then that programmer left, the one with the car. And at that point, I forget what the order of things was exactly. Maybe he had already moved on to something else. At some point we convinced Paul, we live in Cambridge. Our friends who are going to be testing it and writing stuff, they live in Cambridge. Just let us stay down there and all the art's done. Just let us stay down there and like finish the game, and other people can move on to doing things for Underworld 2 or whatever. And so for a couple months, probably, we worked out of our house. It was like a 2-family house, and like the living room of one of the families was just like Blue Sky South. We just set up like 6 computers and everybody like worked there. And then eventually we got a tiny little basement office space in Somerville and finished things there. So by the time that all finished, in the meantime, Looking Glass had moved down south to Lexington, which is a bit west of Boston. So into like some actual real office space that could hold more than 7 people. And so that's when we started expanding, and we're working on multiple games at the same time, like sort of acting more like a real game company in some respects.
You put very much the emphasis on this, like when it was Ultima Underworld, it was like not a real company. It was a bunch of friends, like playing together and making a game.
Yes, playing and working. I mean, it was very intense play where, we were like, yelling at each other a lot, and there was a lot of stress. But it was still also just like a hugely like creative environment, and everyone was like working at full tilt, all the time. So there was just a huge amount of energy like happening like all the time. Not something that you could really ask anyone to do as an employee in a normal game company, although I guess companies try.
I was about to I tried to like leave it for the ending of the segment of Looking Glass, but since we started to talk about this, I think we can also talk about it right now. When you read about Looking Glass Studios and how people work there, it seemed to be like 14 hours days almost every day of the week. Everybody's extremely passionate, crazy in a positive way, but it also like sort of, it might get toxic. Like it feels like everybody is in this company 100% with their heart, with their mind. Like, how did it look like from inside?
Yeah, crazy in a positive way and also crazy in a negative way, I would say. we did not really have much work-life balance. I would not say that like we were all working like 14 hours a day all the time. Certainly, like finishing up Underworld, we were like I was spending basically all of my time working on that. And later on, like we'll get to Terra Nova, but like the last couple months of Terra Nova, I did nothing but sleep and work. Work was in an office, not in my home, but still I woke up in the morning, I went to work, I came home, I went to sleep, and I did that for like 2 months. And I remember when we finally finished that game, or I came home and I was standing in my kitchen and I was just like paralyzed. I was like, I can do anything that I want to do right now. I could read a book. I could go for a walk. I could watch TV. I could like play the piano. Like it didn't occur to me that I could have like control over my own life. That was like how far into it I was. And that part of it, there were very like unhappy things about that. It is not a healthy environment. And when I was just thinking back on the times in preparation for doing this, I'm not really sure how to it's hard to sum up as a like, was it worth it or not? Yeah. Like what's on a single scale, like was it good or bad? Like it was a lot of the times I was like pretty stressed and pretty unhappy, and it was also very like energizing and like felt very special. And at the end of it, we came out with something that I can look back on and be very proud of 30 years later. So I don't want to say, oh, that means it was worth it, but yeah, it's tough. And like, I don't think it should really be necessary to go as nuts as we did to make something good. So I don't want to like give people that impression like, it's just the price you got to pay. But yeah, it was kind of the whole package, and it was kind of there's this positive feedback loop because, all the people around you were really intense. And if they were intense and you weren't, then like, what are you doing there? Like, why are you even like, at this company if you're only going to work 10 hours a day?
Yeah. Did you have partners?
So,
any
yeah,
of you? Any of you? Did you have?
What's that?
Did you have partners? Like any of you? Like
romantic relationships?
Yeah.
You mean?
Yeah.
Not as much as we would have, I think, if we had more sane lives. I didn't at the times when I was talking about like doing nothing but working and sleeping. And I think it definitely like impacted people's like real lives. I had relationships like, in between stuff, but it was, if you were going to have a partner, then it would have to be someone who like was very understanding, and people did, and not, like I said, people weren't working 14 hours a day like for years at a time, but I think everyone whatever situation they were in, it was people who like understood that they were treating it this intensely, or they decided that it was too intense and they didn't stay. And some of those people it would have been nice if we were able to have them work at a more reasonable level. Yeah. So pros and cons.
Did you manage to keep the contacts with the group from Looking Glass? Because this to me is like such an intense group that is working so much together. It's like a camaraderie feeling, and yeah. I wonder, like 30 years later, like do you keep in touch with people?
Sure, a bunch of them, especially the ones who I already knew from MIT. So like some of us will go out and get beers like occasionally. So a bunch of them are still in the area,
Okay.
and people still like keep in touch by email and stuff. So yeah, there's definitely a bond of having been through this shared, sometimes traumatic experience together. Sometimes traumatic, sometimes triumphant.
Okay, all right. We should go back to Terra Nova. Well,
yeah.
So Underworld 2 finishes. Some people go to System Shock. You get to work on Terra Nova. What's the landscape?
So Terra Nova was started. The original lead programmer, and he may even have been the project leader in general, I couldn't remember, was a new hire, and he was very excited about making a like futuristic combat simulation, like in the vein of like Starship Troopers or something like that. And the idea, so science fiction, powered battle armor, you're inside these big suits like shooting lasers and grenades and stuff like that. But it was supposed to be super like simulation-y and like sort of like war gamey, but also real-time 3D. And he was very passionate about that take on it. Like he had a vision for what he wanted like this game to be. And I started on it working on the AI for that game. So you had your squad mates who were partially independent, but you could also give them some goals and they could act as groups or individuals and do all sorts of things. And that was my role at the start. But then he left after a while, and I became the lead programmer, and I don't really remember the sort of like who was driving things from like a design perspective, but we kind of had this inertia, I think, of like, we're still making this intense, realistic combat simulation. And because that was what the game had started out as, and that's what we had been trying to make. So let's like keep trying to make it. And, that's not, if you've played it or seen videos or anything, it's not really like so much. Oh, okay, cool. So, it ended up being like more of a sort of like action shoot 'em up, although there's still all sorts of simulation-y things inside it. But we eventually ended very late in the process, pivoted to like, let's make this fun rather than let's make this realistic. Because, for example, some of the realism part was like not knowing things. I don't really know how damaged this opponent is. We can't really just put big like brackets on them that are green, yellow, or red showing how damaged they are, because that wouldn't be realistic. And then like we did it to try it out to see if it was fun, and it was so much more fun than just shooting over and over until someone blew up. So right, I guess I was just kind of giving like the big arc of where things started and where things ended up. It started in 92. We finally shipped the thing over in 96. It probably wasn't even until 95 that we really like made this kind of wholehearted pivot to making things like more, arcadey, I've said, and fun. Like fun shouldn't be a goal in the first place.
Okay. Now, technology-wise, this is, to me, it kind of blew me away. The amount of systems there is in this game. Like you can, the pathfinding works everywhere. You can direct your squad. You can give different orders to people to do like, okay, hey, I need you to stand there. You need to guard there. You need to follow me and stuff like that. Also, you have like mouse to shoot. And then you have weird controls for this standard today, because like now it's obvious that you want S to go back and not like, and this was something different. But like there was so much, I feel like, innovation in this game for the time being. That was wild, that you kind of was coming up with these systems as you go, make it into one game. and then like switch to another project. How did it look like?
By the way, you mentioned the keyboard movement. I was just remembering that was something that we put in Underworld 1, like very late. In Underworld 1, originally, you just moved with the mouse, like you like clicked here to like turn left or turn right or like move ahead. And like later on, we were like, oh, we should put in some like keyboard shortcuts for people who aren't familiar with that. And then, of course, like keyboard movement became like
Wow.
what everyone does automatically. Like no one moves with the mouse. It's still in there. Anyway, I was reminded when you mentioned the keyboard movement. We were just, I mean, a way that a lot of these games were designed, for better or worse, Underworld included, was from the bottom up rather than the top down. So in Underworld, we were like, we have a dungeon with items and monsters and water and doors and bridges and terrain and what can we do with that? And whenever we thought of something, we'd try coding it up and then we'd put it in and see how it worked. And I think this is where, being skilled or at least fast programmers helps, because someone will be like, oh yeah, sure, I'll hack that up, come back this afternoon and we can see how it works. So in Terra Nova, I've already said how there wasn't really much of a coherent plan for the whole thing of like, oh, we'll do that, put in this for this reason because we need it to satisfy this kind of gameplay element. It was more like, here are all the things we can do in an open-ended outdoor world with people in powered battle armor. So all of the, like, yeah, I should be able to tell my squad mates to do this, or yeah, I should be able to, gravity should be different on different planets. Okay, like then, what happens from that? So, yeah, we just kind of like threw everything in there, and probably not everything stayed in, but probably more than should have. These games are not very focused, I'd say. And it was later in my career, I made much more focused games and kind of appreciated that, but we'll get to that.
Do you remember like the technology, like from the programming standpoint, how did it look like in Terra Nova? Like the systems, you have like inverse kinematics there. Like you have people running around like humanoid things. Like there's so much systems.
The PBAs, the power battle armors, the physics for that was actually something that was kind of a big detour that didn't work so great. Seamus Blackley, who did the music with me for Underworld 2, who was also a physics, I forget if he got his PhD, but he was at the very least a grad student. And he used that physics background when he made Flight Unlimited, which was all about, very realistic, actually modeling what happens when a plane goes through air, not, trying just like fitting curves or something at some higher level. It was all real physics. Anyway, he said, I can make us like, I can simulate humanoids walking around like from like first principles. So the idea was that, like say in Underworld, we had, if you were fighting a goblin, it was, basically like a cylinder, like sliding around. And then like we had an animation on top of it like doing stuff. But he was like, no, we're actually going to model all of the joints of this thing and the forces. And when people walk around, it's because like they'll be like applying a force and moving forward and pushing off the ground and then like moving their foot. Like, I'll make it all work. And we're like, okay, like do a demo. And he did a demo and it like basically worked. I mean, it was amazing that it worked like, 80%. But for it to like be in a game, it has to work 100%. And it was working like 80%, and then was working like 85%, 88%, 90%. It was just like never going to get to 100%. It was just too hard a problem. And things would work most of the time, and then there would be some like numeric stability issue or something, and you could see, someone would like put his foot down, and then you'd see him like slowly start to vibrate. Like, oh no, you knew what was going to happen. And then like 2 seconds later, boom, off into outer space. So reluctantly, eventually, we're just like, it's going to take years, if ever, to get this from 98% to 100%. And we scrapped the whole thing basically and went back to their base to the PBAs are basically spheres moving around. And then a different programmer, James Fleming, who also did the original renderer, wrote a system so that it would appear that people were actually walking around inside. And it looks pretty realistic. It looks like they're walking around, but actually they're just rolling around, and then we're faking the bodies inside. And that was like still like a hard problem, but that's where that ended up. So that was one of the things where like our attempt to do everything like totally simulation-y like ended up not working out.
Yeah. There was also like full motion video and cutscenes in Terra Nova.
Yeah, that was as far as us making the game, actually like programming and designing the game went, that felt like another big detour as well. What happened was, so the game, we started programming in 92. It was probably originally supposed to come out in 94, I would guess, was probably the original plan. But things kept on taking longer, and then we things were pivoting and kept going and going. At the end of 1994, Wing Commander 3 comes out. There were already, like, full motion video was already a thing at the time. Although it tended to be kind of cheesy, and like, there were like these CD-ROM games that were like, showed, were mostly just like excuses to have cutscenes of people in low resolution, like acting, not so great. Wing Commander 3 was a huge hit. It had lots of full motion video, that was like done as professionally as anyone had up to that point. It was still a little cheesy, but, it kind of looked real, like it sort of passed the point at which it was like embarrassing, and got to like, oh yeah, that's kind of like a movie, isn't it? And then everybody wanted to do it. Other games were coming out that were doing full motion video as well. And Terra Nova was sort of in the cluster of games that one might expect to have full motion video. It was another like science fiction action game like Wing Commander or something. We were already kind of like mission based, where there were things happening between missions. And so the business decision was made, that like we literally need to have full motion video, or it will like be embarrassing. Like people won't buy the game because it won't feel like a game like a 1995 or 1996 game. It'll feel like a 1993 game. Okay. So it's just like non-negotiable. We have to do it. So then, of course, suddenly like tons of resources have to get put onto all of that, and integrating that in. You see the video, it's kind of cheesy. But that was another thing that ended up, adding to the expense and time of the whole thing. And, eventually, things kind of moved away from that anyway. It's very 1996.
So, how then the Terra Nova how the completion looked like and the launch?
Well, I mentioned like the last few months is kind of a blur. I mentioned I was doing nothing but
Yes.
like working and sleeping. So yeah, we were just, fixing bugs all the time, where bugs often mean missing features. There's a bug, like, we should add this feature. Yes. So we add it. One thing that that I think, like, the thing that I'm most proud of in that whole game, like, no one ever could possibly see, because it's like behind the scenes. And this came from my experience. I was talking about trying to debug things in Underworld, and without this, probably the game would have shipped like 6 months later. But I decided that the whole game had to be totally reproducible, replayable, so that so we would get bugs, like someone say, like, oh, I was playing the game for half an hour and then I got a seg fault. I think I was shooting.
Yeah.
I was over here and I was shooting someone, but then I got a seg fault. Like, and there's nothing we can do with that. So I thought, well, the game is basically deterministic, except for things like the player input and random numbers, and sometimes things like the amount of time that a frame took, because we use that to feed into the physics engine. But there's a finite amount of stuff that that are inputs into a deterministic machine. And so if we could have a playthrough be like, if we could fix all of those inputs, all of those pipes of inputs, the random number generator and the amount of time each frame took or whatever, and all the player input, then the whole thing would be deterministic. And we could just replay it. We could just say, okay, thank you for making your automatic log file of everything you did. We'll just replay it, and in half an hour we'll have it up in the debugger, and we'll see exactly like what variable was uninitialized or whatever. So I spent, and this doesn't sound like super new now, but I didn't know if anyone else like doing it at the time. And this came from, writing lots of command line stuff in college that was a pleasure to debug because it was very reproducible. And my experiences back in Underworld, where it was just so frustrating trying to reproduce anything. So I spent a while making that all work, as well as separating out some other, like, being a little more fine-grained in the way that we recorded things. So, for example, you could run without the renderer to speed things up. So you could replay, sometimes the bug was in the renderer, so you had to run with the renderer. But, the renderer, for example, if it had to use random numbers, it had its own random number generator, and we stored that separately, stuff like that. So this all ended up working great. Whenever anyone played, it would automatically generate a log file. Whenever we had a bug, it would associate the log file with it. We could play back the log file either in a debugger or like adding in print statements to see what had happened. Another thing we discovered at some point is that like the replays weren't working right. Like things would just start to like veer off from what happened originally. I'm like, how could that possibly happen? And it was because of things like uninitialized variables or whatever. So things were happening differently in the replay than they were originally. So we put in a checksum every frame, checksum for the entire state of the world. That was part of another thing that got fit in. So if at any point the checksum didn't match, we knew that it was usually an uninitialized variable or like, bad pointer, like running, stomping on memory. And that would give us a chance to actually fix that. So this cut our debugging time by like a factor of 10, probably, I'm guessing, like on some of these tough ones. So if it weren't for that, like maybe we'd still be working on the game. I don't know. It probably would have come out like a year later. So yeah, you were asking about like the end of it, just like fixing bugs. Like that made it a lot more possible to actually fix things.
This is crazy that this was fully deterministic. That this is, and imagine today, like this is such an issue for a lot of the games that are like, it's crazy that back in the day you've made it so that it can run. So what was was it fixed time for frames also? Because you needed to reproduce it.
We had, so like when you were running the game for real, I'm trying to reconstruct the logic. When you were running the game for real, we needed to know how long the frames were actually taking, because we weren't running at like a fixed n frames per second. It was as fast as we could push out things. So if we were at a slow frame rate, the physics had to do more per frame. So that was something that fed back in. But when we were making the logs, so instead of just seeing how much time the frame took and using that, we logged it out. And if we were playing from a replay, we'd read it in from the log instead of reading it in from what just happened. So we could say, yeah, that last frame took, 58, milliseconds, whatever. And even if it actually took more or less, maybe it took much less because we were running it without the renderer in the replay, because we didn't think the problem actually had to do with the renderer. So anything like that was like, could have been a feedback loop. We logged it in the middle so that when we were replaying it, we could feed it back in from there instead of from the real-time feedback loop.
Nice. And your physics didn't have the fixed time either, fixed step. It was the variable one. Do you remember the integration methods? What was the?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't remember. This was one of the things, of course, that was like making the biped stuff, the real humanoid simulation so hard, was that it wasn't even running on a fixed time step. It didn't know whether we were running at 30 frames a second or 12 or whatever. And it could be trying to do something. Of course, the coarser that is, the harder it is for it to deal with.
I can imagine the fun with the error accumulation with these systems. Then, wow, this is crazy. I had no idea about this. Okay, back to Terra Nova. By the way, you're credited as a project director, which I think you should mention. We should mention this officially.
By the end, yes, I started out as AI programmer, then I became lead programmer, then I became project director.
I guess this contributed to like 2 months of RAF time when it was being shipped. Right?
So that was, that's part of why the end was so stressful for me, because it was my responsibility, everything.
Yeah. So you mentioned that like you realized in the kitchen that like you can do stuff. You can do stuff now, like you're free. But I feel like, this always has this like two edges, no? Like on one hand, yes, you're free, but on the other hand, like it gave you probably a lot of purpose, and you were always like very targeted, like I know what to do. What did you feel like when you were starting another project after Terra Nova and being such intensely focused on shipping it, and then it was kind of gone?
Well, so after Terra Nova, I said, never again. I'm not going to do like that kind of thing. So I tried to find a way for me to contribute in like a more rational kind of way. And so for a while I was kind of leading like a tools team, like along with like, I think like Sean Barrett was like doing that too, like at the time. And Sean, of course, was on Terra Nova. He talked about it while he was in your interview. By the way, when Sean talked to you about how he got the job at Looking Glass, and he said, "Oh, I knew this guy from Usenet who said, 'Why don't you apply?' I was that guy."
Nice.
So I was the one who got
nice.
Sean that job. So I was doing like tools, like stuff for a while, like a few months, and that was fine. And then Thief, which wasn't yet Thief, asked if I would lead that project, just because they thought that was the best way to manage it. And I was super ambivalent about that, because I just had, but the highs and the lows of like running this project and getting it out the door. And on the one hand, the lows were pretty low. And on the other hand, at the time I was like 27, and I thought like my career trajectory is still like going up, and here's a chance to like do the next big amazing thing. And if I don't do it, what am I turning down? So I finally decided, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And I felt, quite ambivalent about it. And then it turned out that in like a couple months after that, another friend of mine that I knew from MIT, from the music program, who had started up Harmonix, recently called me and asked if I was interested in working there. And that was exciting for a bunch of reasons. One of the reasons was that it was getting away from games. That didn't totally end up happening in the end. So I actually only ended up being on Thief for like a month or two, as it turned out, before I left for Harmonix. But things turned out okay with Thief. And it was probably good for everyone, because that turned out to be another, apparently, just tough game to get out the door.
I love this game, by the way. I love Thief. This is incredible how Looking Glass pulled this off. Like this game, like being stealthy game, but also like horror-y game, and also like having this mechanics, and like, by the way, the story about like first getting called like better red than undead, while being like there's a zombie apocalypse in the Soviet Union, and like it's better for you to become a communist than a zombie. Like this is crazy.
There are some crazy ideas. I mean, yeah, a lot of these games, I mean, so many people at Looking Glass were so smart and so like curious and so like passionate. Like when I say smart, I feel like I don't want to just be like, oh, they were blessed with good genes of being intelligent. I just mean like they were interested, in being smart and thoughtful. They were thoughtful. And everyone was like thinking really hard about things all the time and enjoyed it and felt that like they had a need to think really hard. And like the the programmers thought about game design all the time, and had opinions about art too. The designers thought about programming. They thought about what was technically feasible. Whenever there was a new feature, they'd think, how could we use it? Or, if you added this thing, we could use it in this other way. The artists were, also had design ideas and like were interested in how the tech works. So just like everybody, it wasn't compartmentalized like at all. Everyone always had like tons of opinions, and everyone always wanted to maximize like the product, like just make it as good in every dimension as possible. So that's how you get, a bunch of different games that like all did a lot of like amazing things, both I think technically and design wise. So yeah, it was a special place, like in those ways, for sure.
So you're leaving Looking Glass Studios, I think this was the name back then, and then you're giving the project direction on Thief to.
Greg LaPiccolo was the project leader on Thief. So he had started as like an AV person, like working, I think, largely on Terra Nova. So doing like audio, a lot of audio recording and stuff like that, working with like musicians and sound people. And he must have been I'm sure he was very involved in like the FMV stuff as well. Anyway, so he didn't have a technical background, but he also, so he came from a music background, but he was also just like incredibly thoughtful and curious. And so I actually suggested him when I like said, oh, I'm going to leave, and management was pretty disappointed with me. But I said, I bet this guy Greg, like he'll be really good. And then it turned out he was, and he actually ended up at Harmonix later,
really?
As well. Yeah.
Okay.
So he was also, involved in Guitar Hero and Rock Band. He after Thief. So he finished off Thief. He did not join me immediately.
Okay. So tell me about Harmonix. Tell me about Guitar Hero.
So there's a lot of Harmonix before we get to Guitar Hero.
Okay.
If you have the time. It was started from a couple of people that I had known in the music program at MIT as undergraduates. They had been working at the MIT Media Lab as grad students. So the Media Lab does all sorts of crazy things. They were doing things with music. Their thing there was trying to make music accessible to non-musicians, and not just like music, like listening to music, but creating music. So they had sort of a demo at the Media Lab that they ended up sort of basically trying to monetize. That was the first thing they did with Harmonix. It wasn't exactly the same project, but it was the inspiration, which was called the Axe. Axe is a term for guitar, and it let you play a musical solo, like a guitar, saxophone, whatever, over a pre-recorded background, using not a guitar or a saxophone, but a joystick. So we had the background playing, and then you would, with your joystick, be playing and saying, I want to play like higher or lower or faster or slower. And or you could use the joystick buttons to do various things like repeat like little like melodic contours, but it would change harmonically as the harmony changed underneath. And so you could play like, make a lot of the same kind of decisions that a soloing musician would make, but at this macro level where you didn't have to know anything about how a melody or harmony worked. So that was what they had in progress when I joined, and I worked on that first. I was working on a fun project first. I don't like what. Do you have any like musical background? I don't know like how much.
So I'm embarrassed.
It will make sense.
I'm embarrassed to say that I played the guitar, but only from tabs, like not from notes. So I did try to learn it at some point. So I have like a basic thing. I know it's a key and like how to do this stuff, but not much to be honest.
So the thing I was working on is that we had MIDI files of songs that came from karaoke programs. So we had all these MIDI files and of like the background, and I was writing a program in Perl to analyze the MIDI, which was just like, you probably know like what a piano roll like notation kind of thing looks like, just like here are all the note ons and note offs and when they happen. And I was doing like a harmonic and melodic automated analysis of it so that I could generate what we call a lead sheet from it, which says what the harmonies are and what like the scales are at any point during the song. So that then that would be fed as input into the soloing mechanism, so that when you said like I want to play, higher or lower, it would know like what pitches would work and which ones weren't. So that was a fun research project that I got to use my programming skills and my music skills to do this like automated analysis to like, when are the harmonies really changing and when are things like just kind of, it's just a variation and we shouldn't really change it, or, if it is changing, at what point do we decide that it really should be a change, and like what's the rhythm, is it swung or straight, and all that stuff. So that was a lot of fun. So we did make this program, The Axe, and it came out as a product. It sold very poorly. It was not really, it was a toy. I don't mean that disparagingly. It was like literally something to play with, not something that you got a score for, you could beat or whatever. And so it was, I think, hard to sell it as something that you could really buy and use like for a long time. So we made lots of other music products for a while, just kind of scraping by. There's something was done for Disney for Epcot Center. We did a little interactive music thing where you could wave your arms around and make music in kind of a similar kind of way. I want to play higher or lower, or faster or slower. It was at Epcot for a while. It's probably not still there because it's like, almost 30-year-old tech by now. And then eventually, we got the opportunity to make a PlayStation 2 game for Sony, and that was called Frequency. And that was a beat matching game where, using your joypad, you have to press buttons at the right time, matching information that's streaming down a track, similar to how Guitar Hero like eventually looked, but you were using a joypad instead.
How big?
And we did.
How big is Harmonix at this point?
Let's see. When I joined, also I was probably number like 6 or 7. At this point, we were maybe 20, maybe in the 20s, making when we were making Frequency, because it was still basically like we would work on like a couple projects at once, and this is including people who are not developers, finance and business and like all that sort of stuff. People who are like going out trying to get us clients, because that was not easy. So probably total a couple dozen or something. So those, we made a couple of music games that of these beat matching games that like worked, like that it sold, I think, pretty well. I mean, we made 2 of them, so Sony like liked the first one enough to make a second. Then there was the kind of I don't know, I'm trying to think of like there's sort of a parallel history between Looking Glass and Harmonix. So we had Underworld and Underworld 2, and then we had Frequency and Amplitude, like our 2 music games. Then there's the like maybe ill-advised attempt to do something else, which maybe Terra Nova for Looking Glass, and in our case was now I'm blanking on the name because it was
it was so ill-advised.
Because it was there it is. Antigrav was on my shelf. Antigrav was a 3D hoverboarding game. What happened was Sony had a new product. It was like a camera. It was called the iToy, and they were looking for developers to make games for the camera for the iToy. And we had done a couple of these music games for them. And so we were on a kind of a natural company to do this stuff. So it was a hoverboarding game. You were riding a hoverboard and the camera was looking at you, and as you leaned or like did various things, it would change how the hoverboard worked. But it was, first of all, from a tech perspective, it was very tough. The camera was just an RGB camera, so like no depth or anything. We had to like infer everything like totally just from the pixels. And we had no idea what kind of lighting conditions you would be under, which changed things a lot. And then, we were originally designing the game thinking that you would have a lot of control over your hoverboard, because that was sort of the point, was that you can, that you can do interesting things with it, but then you couldn't control it all that well because of the limitations of the tech. And once again, like it took a long time to pivot into let's make this fun. And then it turned into more kind of like a snowboarding kind of just like go around, downhill through things instead of trying to like navigate through like city streets or something. Anyway, we got that out. We did finish it. It did okay. At the meantime, some other people at Harmonix were working on a karaoke game. And that was also a 9-month or less project. The original developer was like not working out, and so the publisher like came to us and said like, can you please like take over this? It was like February or something. Can you take over the karaoke game? Like we want to like ship it for the holiday. And we're like, yeah, okay. And like they actually like got it out the door.
This is
it was just,
I mean, maybe
it was Konami, yeah.
But this is usually like you get that dumpster fire of a project, no? Like,
yeah, but well, I mean, I'm about to get to Guitar Hero, believe it or not, and that was also a very short project, under a year. And the thing that was good about those is that they were really focused. You didn't have time to screw around and like the way that we did at Looking Glass. Yeah, it's kind of the opposite in a way. Like every day is you have like one day less before you have to ship the game. Coming in, when I came in this morning, we had like 130 days, and at the end we'll have 129. And like I'd better like make one day of progress. And it made it very easy to make decisions, to cut features, or to say that's as good as it is, we're moving on to the next feature. So I think if we had handled it in a different kind of way, and then had too much stuff on our plate, and then suddenly we have a month to finish it and we can't, then you get the dumpster fire. But with those games, they all really felt like we were on target to hit.
Okay.
Like the whole way through. And like we crunched at the end, like of course, but it was pretty controlled.
Okay.
So what happened with Guitar Hero finally is that we were approached by a publisher, Red Octane, that wanted to make a guitar game, and we were the natural people to do it since we had made music games and beat matching games. And we said, sure, we'll take your money. Like, this is not going to be a hit, but if you want to pay us to make it, that's fine. We're happy to do it. So I was the first person to work on it. I made a little demo in like a few days. We had a guitar from some other guitar, like some Japanese guitar game. It was basically a fake joypad. You press buttons on it and it just as if you press the triangle button or square button. That was the API. It just plugged in the same way. And I made a little 2D graphics version, because that's all I was capable of doing, where things were streaming down, and when they hit some line, you had to press the button, and that would mute and unmute various tracks. So that was the first demo of it, and that, literally a few days before people could play that. And then we decided yeah, okay, we can make this game. It seems like it'll be fun. The score was you get 1 point every time you play a note. That was the extent of the gameplay. Yeah, and then it was it was a small team, just a few programmers, bunch of artists, a few musicians.
You did also work on the guitar itself, the controller, or was it something that came from publisher?
That came from Red Octane. That came from the publisher.
Okay.
So, we got their final model probably a week before we sent the full master of our game off. They were sending us prototypes. But yeah, it was all happening at the same time.
Okay. Guitar Hero works that if you press a button, a part of the track is being played, and if you don't press a proper way, kind of the track stops, sort of, right? The track goes on, but the part stops.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's actually a more interesting problem than you'd think. Certainly than I thought originally. At the heart of it, we are muting and unmuting a track. You're not just with our first games, you were pressing buttons on a joypad that were matching cues that were coming down a track. And so we could say, okay, you were supposed to press triangle and you pressed it 10 milliseconds early, that's good enough. Or you pressed it 40 milliseconds late, that's not good enough. Or it's very easy to have a yes/no decision at any point about whether to mute or unmute. And with the guitar, first of all, just the UI of it, there are two different things you do to play a note. You're pressing a fret and you're strumming. And so abstractly, the note that you're playing is determined by what fret you have down at the time that you strum. But of course, maybe you didn't really quite do it perfectly. Maybe you strummed first and then you fretted it 5 milliseconds later, and we really should give you credit for that too. So already things are getting a little more complicated in terms of what did you really do? If you, say, the whole thing, the reason that it got interesting was that you had a controller that actually had a fair amount of it wasn't any input that you made could possibly mean more than one thing. If you pressed a fret, say you had a fret down, and then you strum almost just barely before you press the next fret, maybe you meant to really hit the next fret, or maybe you meant to strum it and then hit the next fret after. And if you were playing an actual guitar, physically something would happen, and we just simulate that. But you were doing, fairly interesting things. We also had these things which imitated how real guitars work called hammer-ons and pull-offs, where you don't necessarily have to strum to produce a new note. If you have a fret down and the string's already vibrating and you press down another fret on the same string pretty hard, it'll keep vibrating, but you'll get a new note. Just on a guitar, it won't have the same sort of pluck attack. Or same kind of thing, a string could be vibrating, you could release a fret, and now another pitch would happen. So, and in order to make things realistic, we put these things in the game as well. Know. But you could choose whether to play it that way or not. And we, depending on what you were supposed to be doing, your input might be like correct or not. So we weren't doing something as simple as seeing what you did and then seeing like what notes you produced and then comparing it to the stream of notes that was supposed to happen. Because what notes you were producing we could interpret it in multiple ways, and we needed to check it against what you were supposed to do. And this was all happening in real time, and things could happen out of sequence a little bit. So we might have seen, oh, he hit the strum, but we should wait a little to see if they press the fret in time, or maybe it's in the other direction. There are also chords, of course. You're asked to press two things at once. Anyway, it ended up being a very interesting problem to make this feel very natural. Ideally the player doesn't notice any of this at all. They're just doing what the game tells them to do, and it says, yeah, you did it. But in fact, the things that they're doing can be often kind of hard to interpret. And the debugging things, not just debugging the implementation, but sort of debugging the design. Again, I went back to, I love things like replaying things from log files. That's kind of my go-to. So what I would do is, I would log the interesting things that had happened, where all the cues you had were, and then when all of your input events, various frets being pressed down and released, when strums happened, all these things, log it all, including then also log the decisions that had been made. Oh yes, he really meant to play this chord, or we decided that this was a failure, blah, blah, blah. And then from that log, I had a Python program that would input the log and output a big PNG that was a timeline of the entire song with all of those events on it in time. So all of the cues for you, all of the things you were doing, all of the ways in which what you were doing got associated with the cues, little arrows, colored arrows, pointing to the right thing or thing. I had this whole iconography for it, so that whenever any tester or something, or myself, complained, I thought I played this well, but I got told that I failed, what's going on, I could then replay the log and see exactly what happened. Oh yeah, we probably should have given credit to you for that, but this one thing happened in between these two events that should have been considered as a unit, and I should have just thrown it out, or at least remembered that the old one was still active, and okay, let me now fix it. So that, again, that sort of replay dynamic was very valuable.
It's interesting that you switched games so much. The types of games you use the replay for are so different, yet they are so useful in both scenarios, kind of from different purposes. In the beginning it was the difficulty of replayability. Here it's even more understanding what happened with the inputs, and because there are so quick changes that you cannot notice it. But it's pretty cool that both of these the debugging, investing in the debugging tools seems to pay off. that's the summary.
And I've never had a lot of facility with interactive debuggers. I mean, when I need to, I've used them, but I'm much more comfortable making things replayable, having like gigantic log files, and then processing the log files at my leisure. You know, I can spend like a day going through a log file and trying to understand exactly what happened. And if you're replaying something and you have a log file of it, and like, wait, something went wrong between this line and this line in my 2 gig log file. Like, okay, let me just run it again. I'll put in a new printf and I'll just run it again. And like, now it'll tell me like what happened. And so like, that's always the way I've been most comfortable, like debugging stuff. And I don't know like what people do mostly now, like in modern days, but for me, it's all about the log files.
Yeah, but I think you have also the ability to replay it and then add an additional one, right? Like a lot of people, like there's this sort of debate between like, oh, do you use a debugger or do you use like printf debugging, like you just print stuff? And the idea is like, oh, if I'm doing the debugging, I can stop and look up all the state that I have. And if you're doing printf debugging, you need to do it again and you need to get to the same place. But if you have the ability to replay it, and often like without a renderer, right, 10 times as fast, for example, now like it changes the scale. Just like
yeah. Just like if it takes compiling, if it takes like 10 minutes versus 10 seconds, it kind of changes what you can do, even if it doesn't seem like it changes what you can do. Yeah.
When I was playing Guitar Hero, like back in the day, I think I already played the guitar a little bit, so I knew like how to do it on the real guitar. And you being a musician, did you try to make it harder? Like, because Guitar Hero is easier for anybody to pick up. Like, obviously it kind of needs to be. Like, you can't be like, hey, do you have an ability to play the real guitar? Because like, if not, you won't be able to play this game. Like, this would be too big of a difficulty level. But in Guitar Hero, you could push this a little bit further and make it a bit more difficult to kind of like
We had maybe I think 4 difficulty levels. So at the highest level, there was really one gem. Those were the cues per note. So you really had to do everything just as fast and accurately as an actual guitarist, except, you had fewer, your activity was more limited. And at the easiest level, you might be playing one note and it would trigger an entire riff, of 5 notes or something. So the music itself gave us generally a good scale of difficulty. Like playing, we had some pretty virtuosic songs in there. And so the hardest songs played at the hardest difficulty automatically were like very challenging for anyone.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. I didn't realize this. Maybe I just played the easy difficulty because I like didn't want to do it. But I remember like playing the and my keystroke matching more than one note. But you're saying this kind of changed in the more virtuoso kind of style difficulty level.
So as the difficulty increased, you'd be playing more. It would be more of a one-to-one mapping between the gems and the notes. You might have to play chords rather than just single frets. You might have to play 2 at once. It might like switch back and forth between frets like more frequently. But basically, we were trying to make for the expert level. We were trying to make the ideal was that the player who is playing was basically doing the same things with their hands that they would be doing if they were actually playing like the real song. And we had the musicians that we had all, were pretty technically minded, and that we had. I don't remember how many musicians we had at our peak, like working on Rock Band, where you had to make charts for 4 different instruments, 4 different difficulty levels, for like new songs that are coming in every week. But like that was a whole industry that we had in this one building of we had sort of a house style for how music would translate into our charts, into our sequences of cues.
Okay. So Guitar Hero 1 launches, and it is quite a spectacular success. What happens next then for the studio, for Harmonix?
So the short version, if you want to know the long version, by the way, there's like an oral history of Guitar Hero, like out, I think on Vice.com, that has the whole thing. I think at the top it says like estimating reading time 5 hours. So like if you have a day to kill, you can read all about it. But it was things got a little crazy. So because Guitar Hero was so popular, what happened was Red Octane, the publisher, got acquired. But now that I'm like trying to give the whole history on the fly, of course I'm forgetting like what all the companies involved were. But they were acquired. They had the publishing rights, even though we were the developer. So, and the publisher decided to go with a new developer, not us. So, but we had the rights to all the code. So we had still, at this point, we were still making Guitar Hero 2, I guess, for Red Octane. So Guitar Hero 2 came out, that was still us. But then Guitar Hero 3 and Activision was the company that bought Red Octane. So Guitar Hero 3 and following were done by Activision or by another developer under Activision. We still had the rights to our code, so they had to start from scratch, basically duplicating Guitar Hero. Meanwhile, we had all the Guitar Hero code, and so we decided to make Rock Band in a year, including hardware from scratch. So that's maybe the craziest one yet, is that we did that basically in a year, including the hardware, like the drums and making our own guitars and everything. So that's like when people hear that I worked on Guitar Hero and Rock Band, they get confused because they're like, weren't they competitors? Like, yeah, they were eventually, but we actually made Guitar Hero and then we made Rock Band.
How did your position look like for these projects? Do you work mostly as a programmer? Do you work as in a project director? Like, how does it look like?
I was programming, and with all those games, the beat matching ones early on too, but Guitar Hero in particular, there were. It was similar to Looking Glass. I mean, a bunch of us had come from there, including Greg LaPiccola by that point. So we were familiar with kind of this style where the design was this communal effort. So, a lot of the design of Guitar Hero in the sense of the just the way that things worked, how we treated your input and how it felt, that was kind of done by me just at my desk. I was writing it and designing it, and if I thought something didn't work well, I'd play with it until I thought it worked well, and then I'd show it to other people and they'd give their feedback. Some other things were happening in more kind of a group way. There were probably maybe 5 or 6 of us that were kind of, including me, that were kind of responsible for a sort of like a design cabal making sort of group decisions of how things went. The art director, Ryan Lesser, had a very strong vision of what the art should look like. We had lots of people. Most of our artists were in bands. I was in a band. And so it was very authentic feeling, it was like, this is what it's like to be in like a grimy club in front of 12 people, so like the art style was really good and with Rock Band, I remember in particular having these like design cabal meetings where around 6 of us would get together and like try to make decisions about, the software, the art, the hardware. How are we going to, the game design? How are we going to score, drum playing or singing? All of these kind of decisions. And we did have a lead designer who was kind of first among equals. And if he, kind of put his foot down and said like, I really think we have to do this, then he'd probably get his way. But like the CEO is the one who got his way, in the end. But yeah, again, it was just a group of people who were all, multi-classed, as they say in the RPG world, like really thinking. If they were programmers, they still thought about like design. If they were designers, they still thought about the tech part. If they were artists, they still thought about the design part and the tech stuff. And yeah, it was a really good group of people.
Nice. Interesting to have like so many musician degrees, and then for like your day job, you're doing something else. So you're like mixing in, and you're kind of, you have this, your hobby, like music will be like your hobby or like something that you adore, but you don't spend your full time on it. And then actually in your full time, you're making things with music. So it now starts to pour into like, so it's not like you're not a musician, but then like this is heavily your part of your life now, your day job and everything else. Nice.
It was really nice to be able to like use like all my skills, and I remember thinking when I was working on like the guitar stuff, the guitar gameplay, thinking like, I am the perfect person to be working on this. Like I have these programming skills, I have these music skills, and like I can have this feedback loop going on, in my own head, going super fast instead of like handing stuff off to someone else and back and forth. And like, maybe there's a little mismatch in the communication. And it was just a really nice feeling to like just feel very capable.
So how did the development of Rock Band look like?
So we were doing, we were doing the hardware at the same time. So that was really like the thing that really drove everything. And I was only involved with that insofar as I was the person writing the code to interact with it. So we had, the drums were again a fake joypad. By fake I mean that was the API we were like reading from them. I guess I was helping, as all of us in that group were, like decide like what they would look and feel like. But for me, it was also, okay, how are we going to, detect things? How are we going to use them as an input device? What's going to happen if the player is like left-handed and wants to like play, this way instead of that way, like, and things interact with each other in weird ways. By that point, the team was a lot bigger, and so I was working on, some of that core stuff, like how the drums worked, but it wasn't so much like, oh, I'm responsible for like 40% of the code or something.
Okay, so you had more also programmers to help you with that stuff.
Yeah. I was working, like someone else was doing all of the vocal stuff. Like I didn't have anything to do with that. Of course, we were able to reuse things from the karaoke game, which was nice. But it was nice not having to deal with that.
Okay. And then you make a Rock Band game. You need to let me know like how much of the stuff here, how many stories that you have also on the Rock Band subject before we kind of close the game development arc.
The one more interesting thing I wanted to mention about these games that isn't as obvious necessarily to people is that the timing was so important. Most games, other games that I've worked on, you're just trying to get things to happen as quickly as possible, and you don't really worry. You react to the input and you do something. You're trying to render things fast, do AI fast. In this game, in all of our beat matching games, if you are off by, like, it doesn't take much time, 10, 20 milliseconds, like off before things feel funny for the player. Like, I thought I did this, but it says I was late, but I swear I was on time. If you, you can imitate this if you like play like electronic drums or something and increase the delay. Maybe you don't even have to increase it at all if the drums aren't that great, from like what you play to what you hear. And once it gets like a little, like it doesn't have to be much before you just can't deal. It's now like two discrete things happening, you playing and you hearing a sound, and like your brain like starts processing it very differently. So synchronizing everything was super important. Synchronizing your actions, synchronizing the cues that you were given so that you were being cued to do something. If you thought you were being cued to do something at this time, that's actually when we expect you to do it. Animations that were synchronized being synchronized exactly. So everything ended up being sort of on 3 different timelines. There was the timeline of input, like how long does it take between the time the player does something and we notice it. There's the audio timeline of how long between the time we ask for something to happen in the speaker and it happens. And there's the video timeline of how long it takes from when we like ask to display something and it happens. And all 3 of those are different. So anytime we do anything, anytime we react to input or we decide to make an audio cue or we decide like what we're showing, we have to be extremely precise about nothing is ever happening now. It's always happening like at time T on the video timeline or time T on the audio timeline. And maybe that means you have to like wait 20 milliseconds before you like put it out because that timeline is running ahead of the other ones. Sometimes it means you have to get it at this millisecond, because it's like already too late. So that was something that like wasn't clear to us starting out, and then like at some point really had to become a very formal like part of the programming process.
You made some abstractions to handle that, so that like you can at some point write code more easily, but this happens underneath, or was it like always you have like 3 tracks and you need to think about it?
I'm trying to remember, like it was definitely formalized in the code to some extent, and I can't remember if it was like just through like, the type system or if we had like actual different like systems. Everything got fed off to different systems at some point. Yes. Of course, the audio system, the video system, like we're sending out. But I don't remember the details of how we handled it, but it was, that was something we had to really take into account very much.
Did you have issues with the low-level libraries for syncing video and audio, like them misbehaving and sort of you kind of expected them, you've done everything correctly, but your computer is doing something off a little bit.
Right. I'm trying to remember where the issues that we had, where they came up. We were doing some sound stuff. We were originally doing like basically once per frame, and then we had to like then do it more often and have communication back and forth with a different thread. And that was annoying. And I don't remember how much of that was using like low-level stuff from like Sony and Microsoft, and how much of it was our own stuff. But it was that was a bunch of work, like getting that all just right.
Did you manage to do it like in the beginning of the project, so that you can kind of figure it out and then you have a sane development? Or was it like you have this development that is happening feature-wise, but also like these things are not syncing and you're like doing this on top?
The timeline stuff definitely happened midstream.
Oh wow.
I was like, okay, I'm sure this has happened to you, that like, okay, I had this one concept and I realized now it's actually two concepts, and I have to take all my code that was using this concept, everything that's using it, I have to decide which bucket it goes into. And now you have like two, different classes or whatever. So there was definitely like that moment where, we had some sort of like sync variable. And then at some point we realized, wait, that's not actually what's going on. We actually need more than that.
Yeah.
And like, then, I find in general, like I'm always a fan of more types, and because they give you, precision about what you're talking about. So saying once we got into the mode of saying, okay, this is audio, this is video, this is input, and we know that, and we have it tagged in that way, it just made all other kinds of stuff easy. At some point, it might not be clear if you're in some random function in the middle of some call stack that you're actually at this point transitioning from the input timeline to the video timeline. You might be in some function that like doesn't even know it has anything to do with either of them. But if you are able to make types for that, then like, okay, it's an error if you didn't make the changeover at some point.
Now, this segues really nicely into the question I want to ask about, like, what have you learned? Do you have any programming principles over the period of time you were programming throughout like your career? Did you establish something that are like better than others in terms of like patterns?
So you've heard already about like the log files and debugging and like reproducibility. That's kind of like the number one thing. And I just got to types, which I am very passionate about, more than I think a lot of other people say in game development. Like I've always had, I think, a pretty math-like way of thinking about things, like going back to, like, I don't know, like first year physics, like, you learn about like units and how like units are like super important. And like, if your input was in meters and your answer is in seconds, like somehow at some point you like multiplied by seconds per meter, like that had to have happened. And that way of thinking about things and very rigorously defining what your objects are. I don't mean objects so much in object-oriented kind of way, but just your, entities, really has always stuck with me. So I always type things out as much as I can. A lot of things in the programs that I've worked on have been with indices rather than pointers for all sorts of reasons. One reason is like, keeping objects near to each other is nice. Another is, for me, is that my log files look much nicer if my outputs are, say object number 37 and not, some 16-digit hex number. But because I use indices all the time, indices are always associated with the thing that they're indexing. So I don't want to say, if I have something that it means like apple number 3, I'm not going to use that to look up into the orange, like list of oranges. That's an error. So like the first thing, like I've done at like a bunch, like 3 different jobs now, is like rewrite my little like C++ class that like makes a little wrapper around an int. So that says this kind of int can be used only to index into this kind of vector and vice versa. Okay. So if you're passing around like a player ID, like that can't possibly get confused with a gem ID or a track ID, any time you do, like, it's just a compile error. And of course it all like compiles out, but like that's how seriously I take my types.
Yeah. Have you tried Haskell or like this?
The last job that I had, I was largely programming in Haskell.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, I thought it was great. When I do recreational programming, it's often in Haskell. And I love the way that, at a higher level, it's doing the same kind of thing. Like, this is a functor. Like, okay, these are all the things you can do with functors. These are all the things you can do with monads. Do you use Haskell?
I used when I was in university. I was like got introduced to it, so I've written a couple of programs in it. So I'm familiar with like the style of thinking, but nothing too serious. Like I didn't write like 10,000 lines of one single Haskell program. But then, how do you keep in your head, like you worked on these games where you're like flipping bits pretty much, like you needed to optimize for memory, like you needed to know like exactly, is this like virtual memory or not, like what's the address, like how big of a thing is. And then you have a Haskell, which is like completely the other side of spectrum. You don't worry about these things like bits and memory, like you have your mathematical,
you just write down the math.
yeah, exactly, you have your proof to write here. Like don't worry about this like engineering details. How do you like these two worlds? How do you combine them?
These days I don't combine them much. I think that I worry about, like, if I'm writing stuff recreationally, sometimes I worry about speed, but I definitely gravitate more to the Haskell-y like kind of philosophy. And maybe if I discovered it earlier in my career, I would have gravitated to it earlier. When I was writing stuff back in, at Looking Glass, like I didn't really know about any of that. So, flipping bits was very natural. It's what we did. I was always, I think, at Looking Glass, I was kind of the like clean code guy. I think other people were more kind of hackers, and I was more like, okay, let's like make this nice and make the API consistent. And so like I even had those kind of that approach, back then, but I couldn't fully express it yet.
Did you have fights over it at Looking Glass?
Yeah, I'm sure. We had so many fights, I can't remember exactly which ones. But yeah, there was definitely, tension over, like, can we sort of like hack this up and move on versus like, let's do this, very, very neatly and nicely. Like, no one wanted to write code that was incorrect. But, like Doug, for example, was much more of a hacker, and I was like more of a,
When you say
clean code guy.
Clean code, do you mean how the code presents itself, that it's eligible and like a sane API, or do you also involve like the Uncle Bob clean code rules of like representing things as object-oriented hierarchies with inheritance, and like functions shouldn't have more than 30 lines of code? Because I need to warn you, if that's clean code that you think about, then in the comments there will be a lot of negativity. Okay,
thank you for the warning. It's well, now I have to watch my words. I do not believe in like these very like formal like things that like you are talking about. But for example, I know that a way in which I differ from many game developers is like length of functions. Like I like having lots of functions that do one thing, that have a name that says what they do, and then I compose them. And I know that is anathema to many of the people down there in your comments section.
There will be hell. There will be hell.
That's fine. I'm not going to tell them how to like make their projects. And it's certainly true that, I've had times when I'm trying to debug something and like I see that there was a problem in this function, and then there's like a call stack that's 30 things long, and I'm like, oh god, wait, where am I? What called what? And did I call this thing yet, or will after? And if it had just been one 200-line function, it would have been easier. Like I totally admit that, but it's just the way like my own brain works. I like to if I put something in a function that does one thing and that has one name, then I don't have to think about it anymore until I have to. But so it's not, that's easier for me than having like, okay, here's our main loop and it's like 500 lines long and like, let me like find like what happens next. It's just the way I like to decompose things. And, some of the most productive times that I've had programming have happened when I've been working on something myself with lots of little functions. Sometimes they're one line long, and I'm like, oh, I want to do like this next thing. Oh, okay, I'll just like combine these three, and that's my next thing. Oh, here's a new feature to add. I'll just combine those and do that. And for the way I work, that works great. I have had arguments, debates with other people, at Looking Glass and at Harmonix, who like prefer other styles. But that's another kind of like Haskell kind of brain thing, I think, probably.
That's interesting that you also like come from sort of hardcore environment, like the Ultima Underworld. They required you to think very low level, and a lot of people with this background sort of like remained in this like huge functions, zero abstraction, like aiming for like squeezing the performance in a lot of places. It's interesting that you got you changed, or was it like you always had this?
I think preference? I kind of like discovered, I've never been like a huge like object-oriented guy, like tons of like big like object inheritance trees and stuff like that. So Casey can get off my back. But to me, like the types are important. I think like objects are important, but I don't care so much about like methods and like object inheritance. I just want to know, like functional programming uses is sort of object, or maybe not oriented, object based, like in the same kind of way as object oriented programming. It just kind of separates, like, instead of separating things out by type, it separates things out by function. So instead of having like 10 different objects all with the same method because they all like are virtual and inherit from something else. Instead, you have one method, you have one function that has 10 like switches on 10 different kinds of objects it can take. So you're just doing the same thing, just in a different order. So the types are important to me. The object orientedness, like not so much, because like I feel like you often run into things where like the way that you want to think of something can't be represented perfectly with the technology that you have of your programming language, and now like you're kind of stuck.
What do you do now for recreational programming, as you put it?
I have not done a ton lately. So I left my last job, which was the Haskell stuff a few years ago. I still do like Advent of Code stuff sometimes just for fun. I do that in Haskell which is a very nice language.
You went like all Advent of Code every day until the end in Haskell?
Many years, not this latest year. I didn't. I got to like day 15 or something, and I think I found other things to do. The one sort of public thing that I've done more recently is a website, helped with a website. I'm not the main person by any means, that implements these board games. There's a family of board games. The family is called 18XX. They're train games. There are dozens of them. You and your other players are like running train companies. You have a map. But one interesting thing is that you're not like associated with a train company. There are like shares to the train company. Whoever buys the most shares is the president. And as the president, you get to make the decisions for the train company. But then you could like maybe sell all your shares and leave someone else with a really terrible company. There's also a map where people are making routes. It's all very complicated. Ends up being very deep. And there are like dozens of these games with slightly different rules, but kind of similar base concepts and base rules. And so someone started up a website a few years ago called, it's 18xx.games, is where you can play all of these games online, and implemented all these things. And I started helping out with that. And that was a lot of fun, just from a just design and programming standpoint. There are lots of interesting challenges in that there are these rules and concepts that are common to these literally dozens of games, but not always exactly the same. And because people make new versions of these games, it's not even like the full set that you'll have to deal with. If you're writing a single game, you might have, cards that can break rules or whatever, but like, okay, fine, there's a list of them. You make sure you handle all of them. And in this case, people will think, oh, like everything like works great. We can handle these 6 games. And someone says, oh, can you implement this 7th game? It has this different concept, and it means that actually it doesn't fit into anything so far. And we have to sort of refactor everything, sort of like, what happened with those timelines and stuff. So that is an interesting programming and design challenge.
You're still working on this, or was this a...
I haven't worked on that like lately, but I was doing a bunch of help of that at the beginning of it, and sort of like on and off.
This needs to be JavaScript, no?
It's Ruby.
Okay.
That is like transpiled to JavaScript.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's nice. Interesting. Yeah.
That's a venture.
And it turns out actually that the person, the lead guy in it, like shares some of my kind of design thoughts in general in some ways, not so much in some others. But for example, the sort of reproducibility thing, he is like he's very into. So like debugging is like a pleasure because we have these kind of logs too. And he did it totally independently. He like
really?
started the system. I was like, I was like, great. That's my kind of system.
Nice. And you have a blog, right?
Yes, recently sort of resurrected. I was doing stuff for a while, and then it got too like annoying to maintain, and then recently I decided I should.
What's the name of the blog where people can find it?
It's I maybe we could put a link in your the description over, but DFAN says is the name of the blog. It's at dfan.org. DFAN was like the handle that I started using back in college when I tried to type Dan and hit the F as well. I was like, oh, that's a good disambiguation from other Dans out in the world. So it's been DFAN ever since.
I was trying to find out why it's DFAN. I was trying to, is this an abbreviation? And I was like too afraid to ask. And you're telling me it's because you hit the T and
typo.
Also, no way.
Yeah.
No way. Do you play games now? Like video games?
So chess, I started playing when I was 3. I know I was 3 because my father was watching the Bobby Fischer Boris Spassky World Championship match on the television, and I was like, "What's that? You have to tell me what that is." So apparently, I learned the rules when I was 3. So I'm a very passionate player of both chess and Go. Late with the later days, like Go has been the stuff that I've been concentrating on the most. And if people go look at the blog these days, they'll see like 4 or 5 abstruse posts about how to calculate the value of various moves in Go. But those are kind of my two big ones. I kind of like flip back and forth between them. That's like as far as board games go. Video games, I used to play a ton as a kid on like my Apple, playing these Ultima games and text adventures and stuff like that. These days, I don't play as many. Like I'll play like sometimes like one of the big ones that like comes out, like, Red Dead Redemption 2 or like something like that, like something I can really like sink into for a while. More recently, actually, my wife and I spent a ton of time on this puzzle game, Blueprints. Oh, yeah. That is, this sort of rogue-like architectural thing on top of like gigantic backstory with tons of puzzles, and like we basically like organized our life out of like playing that and discovering all the secrets over the course of like a couple months. So that was like kind of an obsession for the two of us. That's like the latest thing that I've been like super
This
into.
game is crazy. Like this is awesome.
Yeah. Yes, I was very impressed.
I love it. I also got so frustrated in it at some points. It's just woof.
Yeah. No, it's interesting how the designer, I think, simultaneously cares very much about the experience that you have, but also like doesn't care like how frustrated you get. So like some things will just be like very like carefully planned out to like be just perfectly presented, and then like if there's some puzzle that's really hard, it's like, well, the puzzle's really hard.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and you better roll the dice better next time.
Yeah. That stuff, that's the sort of like roguelike stuff to it. But yeah, I've seen people get really frustrated with that.
Nice. Dan, thank you so much for this discussion.
Oh, it has been my pleasure. Yeah. It's fun to talk about, some of these things that are a little like behind the scenes, especially some of the tech stuff that like doesn't necessarily like get talked about in like, reviews or like retrospectives or what have you.
How much did you need to refresh your memory? Or how much was it like off the cuff?
my memory was mostly refreshed internally. I mostly was like, oh yeah, that was a thing. It wasn't so much like, oh, I had to go and like remind myself like what this game looked like. I did go and look at some like videos of like Underworld and Terra Nova to remind myself like what it actually looked like and played like and what features it had. I looked up, Terra Nova on YouTube and like just went to the first like overview, and the very first sentence in the video was, Terra Nova was a stupidly ambitious game in 1996. I was like, you nailed it. You nailed it in 2 words.
Great. That's a perfect ending for this show. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining me. This was a lovely discussion.
Sure. Thank you for having me.